Welcome back. Today, we're going to talk some more about socializing. In the last video, we talked about taking the pressure off by broadening our definition of what counts as socializing and creating conditions where our autistic kids can succeed. I'll link that video in the description box if you want to check that one out. But today, I want to go a step deeper because even when we lower the pressure, many parents still find themselves wondering, why does socializing feel so hard for my child in the first place? And that's what we're going to unpack in this video. We're going to discuss something called the double empathy problem, which is a term that came out of research that is really helpful in understanding our autistic kids. We're also going to talk about how the unwritten rules of socializing can really trip our kids up even when they want to connect, by finding their people matters more than trying to fit into every group, and how shifting the burden of adaptation can change the whole picture. By the end, I hope you'll see socializing in a new way, not as proof that your child is behind, but as a question of finding the right fit for them to thrive. If you're new here, my name is Andrea Pollack. I'm a parenting educator and coach, and also the parent of an autistic young adult. So I've been in your shoes. When people talk about autistic kids and socializing, the assumption is that they just don't get it, right? But research paints a very different picture. In 2012, a researcher named Damian Milton introduced the term double empathy problem after reviewing studies that used a simple telephone game experiment. Before I describe what the experiment looked like, the conclusion was that autistic people communicate with other autistic people just as well as neurotypicals communicate with other neurotypicals. In other words, when neurotypicals try to communicate with autistic people, they're not good at it at all. This conclusion is so important because it shows that the difficulty goes in both directions. It's not just a flaw in autistic people. Here's how the experiment worked. People were divided into groups by neurotype. So groups of autistic people and neurotypical people. One person was given a message and the group had to pass it along just like kids do with the telephone game. When autistic people were paired with other autistic people, the message came through just fine. When neurotypicals were paired with each other, they also did just fine. But when the groups were mixed, autistic with neurotypical, the accuracy dropped. That finding is so powerful because it shows that the breakdown wasn't about autistic people being bad at communication. It was about the mismatch between communication styles. That's why Milton called it the double empathy problem. It's a two-way challenge, not a one-way deficit. Think of it like this. Imagine two radios tuned to different frequencies. Both radios work perfectly well, but they can't hear each other unless one or both adjust the dial. And here's the key. In our society, we expect autistic kids to do all the tuning. This information is so important for us to understand and to help our children understand because when they go out in the world, if they have difficulty communicating, what they need to know is it's a different style. They're not wrong. Unfortunately, because they're in the minority, they're the ones who do bear the burden of having to make the adjustments, but it's not because they're wrong. For example, there's a young woman I know who desperately wants friends, but she's afraid of saying the wrong thing. She's worried it will ruin a friendship. She's so worried that she freezes. With neurotypical kids, we might say to them, well, real friends like you for who you are. But that hasn't always been her experience. That fear of misstepping makes it incredibly hard for her to relax and just be herself. Sometimes we interpret these situations as a lack of interest in socializing or a lack of skill. So that's why I think it's so important for us to understand it's the mismatch. Sometimes we also interpret our kids sitting on the sidelines or out of the mix as also being a lack of interest. But I think we just want to be careful about the story we're making up about that. So for example, my son, he can talk, but he's not conversational. He loves to watch group activities for a while before joining in. That's his way of figuring out what's happening. But when facilitators try to make him participate right away, it shuts him down. And, their conclusion is he doesn't want to participate, he doesn't want to have friends. That's not it at all. If they give him space, he joins when he's ready, and when he does, he participates like a champ. So we just want to be careful about how we interpret our children's behavior when we think of it as lack of interest, because sometimes it's not lack of interest at all. It's about how this mismatch of the unwritten rules makes connection exhausting for them. That's why finding their people is so powerful. When your child connects through shared passions, or such as coding clubs or anime groups or robotics teams, or even like on a playground playing side by side, the interaction can flow more naturally. The shared interest can bridge the communication gap, or even if it's not about a shared interest, just being in an environment that feels accepting or connected can feel deeply satisfying. Again, using my son as an example, he participates in a program for young adults. He has these two friends in particular, and the teacher reported to us that they chit-chat together all day. I never thought I'd hear the term chit-chat and my son in the same sentence. Like I said, he's verbal, he can talk, but he's not really conversational. But in a group, his autistic peers, somehow there's some sort of communication going on that is deeply satisfying for them. They laugh. We're not even 100% sure exactly what they're talking about, but he's having a social experience. These aren't consolation prizes. They're authentic, meaningful relationships, and often they're just the spaces where your child feels most at home because the fit is better. So here's the shift we want to think about. As parents, sometimes we feel so much pressure to teach our child to adapt to the majority. And it is important, right? We're not going to get the majority to adapt to our kids all the time. So it is a skill that will help our children succeed in the real world. But the double empathy problem shows us that connection is a two-way street. So we have to have compassion for the fact that all of the burden to change is falling on our autistic kids. So here's what I want you to remember. Social struggles don't mean that your child doesn't care about people. They reflect a mismatch of styles, the double empathy problem. Connection is about fit, not about forcing. So we want to ask ourselves, what would it look like to honor both our child's comfort and their growth? I hope this gave you something to think about. I'd love to talk about it with you in the comments. If you enjoyed it, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, subscribing if you haven't yet, and sharing it perhaps with another parent who needs to hear this message. I'll see you in the next one.